Centennial Institute manages to look big on the outside, but we're really small on the inside. It's my privilege as director to have the wonderful services of an office manager and chief of staff, whom you won't see much this weekend because she is quietly orchestrating the million details that go into making the summit work so well. This is my colleague Joyce Beckett, and then I've got some students and graduates who also help in the office part-time. One of those students is my young friend Bela Franklin from Doylestown, Pennsylvania. He transferred to CCU last fall because the previous fall he heard Hugh Hewitt broadcasting live from Colorado Christian University, and Bela Franklin's ears pricked up out there in Pennsylvania in community college. He thought this sounded like a place that would deliver the kind of education that would meet his faith and political standards that weren't being met closer to home. As Bela was working in our office over the past few weeks, he asked me if we were going to try to get Rick Santorum, his former Pennsylvania home state senator, to address the summit. And with his encouragement, I made a little bit of an extra effort. In fact, Senator Santorum told me earlier today that his staff was crying uncle at how much of an extra effort I made to be sure we got through and got this invitation accomplished. What more fitting choice to introduce Rick Santorum formally this evening than Bela Franklin. And I'm told that we'll have the additional pleasure after Senator Santorum finishes his remarks that he'd be glad to take some questions from you. Folks will be bringing a microphone around to you to stand and be recognized and ask your questions. There's some other state that has something going on politically. I can't think the name of the place. It might be Iowa, and I think perhaps Senator Santorum is actually flying back there this evening, but for as much time as he can give us, we are truly in for a treat from this hero of freedom. Now to introduce him, Bela Franklin.
Good evening. My name is Bela Franklin. I'm a student at Colorado Christian University, and for the past few months, I've been able to work closely with John and Joyce in preparing for this evening. So standing here before you tonight, you don't know how special it is. Now to get to the honor of introducing Senator Rick Perry. Senator Rick Santorum. Wow. A year ago, before coming to Colorado, I had a fairly skewed and in many ways unfounded view of politicians in general. A few rotten eggs seem to have spoiled my perception. However, since joining CCU's newly formed political science program, I've come face to face to the true reality of statesmanship. This is exemplified in the character and service of Senator Bill Armstrong, the Honorable John Andrews, and most relevant, a senator from Pennsylvania, my proud home state, Rick Santorum. In these men, I have found what public service really is meant to be. It's about, and for that I am thankful. Senator Santorum is a man with a strong heart of leadership, founded in and bound to moral and ethical principles. These principles permeate Senator Santorum's being, supporting his devotions to faith, service, and family. This is what public service should be about. It should be a duty, fulfilled to protect what is good. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great joy to introduce to you a man who reminds us what a true statesman looks like, Rick Santorum.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I assume you stood because I was a Catholic, the up and down thing again. So, thank you very much, Bela, and I appreciate those very kind words. And thank you, John, for your persistence in making sure that I knew about this invitation. And thank you to Bill Armstrong, not only for calling and encouraging me to be here, but for being an example. I came to the United States Senate and actually was an observer of the United States Senate, as you can imagine, before I came there. There were a handful of senators that I looked toward as role models to try to aspire to. And there was no one that was higher in that role model chain than your Senator Bill Armstrong. And I just want to thank you for not just what you provided for me, but I know for many young leaders here, not just at Colorado Christian, but what you do for the entire state of Colorado and the conservative movement. You are truly someone to be aspired to. So thank you. God bless you for your service. I appreciate it. It's a particular treat to be here with Jim and Shirley Dobson, who are great friends, and have had the opportunity to be with them on the National Day of Prayer that Shirley runs, as well as on Jim's radio show many times, and locked arm in arm on some of the great moral fights of the day in Washington, D.C. And Jim continues to wage those fights, and he does so with a fervor and a heroic quality that our country is inspired by. And so I always, every time Jim's in the audience when I'm speaking, I always get a little nervous, and I don't know why that is, but it's almost like your dad is here watching what you're doing. No offense, Jim. Jim's not that much older than me. I'm not suggesting that, but it is really great to be here with you and your family. It's great to be here with the conservative family here in Colorado. I have been spending most of my time in Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina. So they have mountains, but not quite like your mountains. And it really is a pleasure to be here. I left Des Moines this morning. Karen, my wife Karen, and I, and our 7 children, we packed up from Pittsburgh on Monday morning at 5:30 in the morning and drove to Iowa. And we're spending 3 weeks in Iowa in anticipation and preparation for the Ames straw poll, which is August the 13th, which is a Saturday. It's one of those occasions where the candidates can show not what the pundits in Washington and those and the media experts in New York and Atlanta are saying what the race is all about and who's the favorite and who's the one that is going to catch fire or rise, but it's the one that is actually a somewhat representative of what's going on the ground in the early primary states that actually do narrow the field to determine who's going to be the next presidential nominee of the Republican Party. And I am, for one, has been to Iowa 24 times and have done almost 100 meetings in the state of Iowa. I think we're going to show that the pundits who have been, saying certain things about me and frankly not saying very much about me, are going to have an opportunity to see what good, honest, hard work does from a candidate who goes out and pounds the pavement and gets in front of folks who care about the future of their country. And I've been very pleased with the people of Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina that they're showing up at meetings in droves. There's a tremendous interest in what's going on in this Republican primary. I know the pundits will tell you that this is not a good field. It's a great field. There are a lot of really good men and women who are standing up and who've got strong backgrounds and folks who we can all be proud of. But I decided to run because I just felt, I say this, and I know I get criticized by the left and by the media for saying this, but I ran because I felt called to run. I don't know why else a father of 7 children would run for the United States Senate ages 20 to 3. It would make that sacrifice to go on the road and to put themselves, and frankly, when you put yourself out there, you put your family out there. Other than the fact that you believe that this is something you're called to do. Now, I sometimes hesitate to do that because then the media reports Santorum says God called him to be president. Well, we all know because God calls you to do something, he doesn't call you to be successful in doing something. That's a plan that you just don't quite know, but you have to do your part. And we're doing our part. We're working very, very hard. And I'm committed to this. I'm committed because I believe that this is the most important election since the election of 1860. The election of 1860 was whether these United States, and that's what the United States was generally referred to, these United States was going to become the United States, a union. And this election is about something different, but something just as essential. This is an election about whether the heart and soul of America, the why of America, what makes America different and exceptional from any country in the history of the world, whether that essence is going to be preserved. See, I got in this race because I believe that really one particular piece of legislation, I know there's a whole lot going on in Washington now and has been going on for 30 or 40 years, and yes, it's a cumulative effect, but I think we've reached a point, a tipping point. And that's why I believe the Tea Party was fired up. That's why I believe this last election was such a momentous election, is because I think everyone understands something big is going on in America. And I believe that thing that will change everything is a bill called Obamacare. Now, the reason I say that is very simple. Let's look at what's going on today in America. Today in America, we're fighting a budget battle. And it seems fairly obvious to every American that government is spending way too much and running way too much of a deficit, and it's hurting the economy, and it's hurting our credit rating, and it's doing just about everything destructive you can imagine. And yet there are those on the left who continue to press forward. And they're on the precipice, potentially, of being successful. Why? Because they've been able to go out and successfully scare America. How can they do that? Well, almost half of Americans rely now on the federal government for some form of payment or benefit. When Barack Obama's back to the wall, what did he do? He went out and scared seniors that their Social Security check wouldn't come. And what happened? The phone lines in Washington got shut down. He scared military wives. He scared Medicare recipients. He scared veterans. Why? Because in some way government has made them dependent upon them. And now imagine Obamacare is implemented, and every single American will have an IV hooked up to them and will now be dependent upon Washington, D.C. for whether they get their test, whether they see a doctor, whether they get their procedure done. Now will all be dependent upon what you give to Washington and those who are allocating that right to you. You see, that is a game changer. That is why Barack Obama was willing to jam this bill down the throats of the American public when they knew it was unpopular and they were going to probably lose an election. They were hoping that the economy would recover after the next election and they could hold on to President Obama and therefore wait and have Obamacare implemented as long as he's there. That was the game plan. That's the game plan they have. They know that if Barack Obama is elected, the soul of America, and what is that soul? The Tea Party folks like to pull out their, and I'm glad they do, this little document here called the Constitution of the United States. It's a great document. The Constitution of the United States is not the heart and soul of America. It is the operator's manual for America. It's the how of America. The why of America is often, and in this case, thank you, Heritage, is printed with. The why of America is printed with the how, and that's the Declaration of Independence. And in that declaration is a phrase that hopefully all of us know. I'm sure if you go to Colorado Christian, you know it. It's a phrase that we take for granted. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, it trips off our tongue and we take it for granted, but we don't recognize. Today, we don't recognize how transformational that phrase was in the course of humankind. For the first time in the history of the world, a government was set up that said rights come to people directly from God to each and every person equally. Rights come from God, not given to the king or the emperor or the sovereign to spread their wealth around. People were not subjects of the sovereign, but the sovereign was there to serve the people. And the Constitution was drafted subsequently to, in my mind, do one thing, and that was to protect life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's why government, we always talk about limited government. It's limited to a very simple thing, and yet we betray it.
We betray it. Government no longer protects life. Is it any surprise that we are now not going to protect liberty? And that's what Obamacare is all about. We will fail to protect liberty. Liberty, freedom, the freedom that our founders believed in. They believed in a country, think about this, they believed in a country that could be great by allowing every individual the opportunity to pursue their dreams, to pursue happiness. What is happiness? What did our founders think happiness was? Not what some, even in our own party, believe is happiness, which is the freedom to do whatever you want. That, our founders knew, was false happiness. True happiness is to pursue what you ought to do, what God has called you to do. Following God's will is the path to true happiness, and our founders knew that. That's why Adams said, Jefferson, all of them said, our Constitution is made for a moral and religious people that's wholly inadequate for the governance of any other. And so we had America, at its founding, a moral enterprise of limited government that believed in you, that believed in free people to go out and transform the world. How did we do? At the time of our founders, life expectancy was 40. We were an agrarian society. Let's go back 1,800 years to the time of Jesus Christ. Life expectancy was 40, and there was an agrarian society. The human condition in 1,800 years did not change markedly. And then America. Then people who believed in you. And people who believed in themselves, who took on that responsibility because they believed they could do good, be just, provide for themselves, serve their family, build strong communities, soar and succeed. Yes, fall and stumble, but that's okay. That's the path to success. And now here we are, 235 years later. Where is the human condition because of America? Life expectancy has doubled in 235 years. We went through 2 revolutions, industrial and technological, and who knows the revolution we're through right now. America, this dynamo, changed not just America, but changed the world. Every other country that has advanced is advanced because of what we taught them and what we gave them. Did the Muslim world change in the last 235 years? Did Africa, Asia, South America? No. Ladies and gentlemen, it was us. It is American exceptionalism. That's who we are. And yet, here we stand at the precipice of being the generation of Americans who give it away. Just give it away. I decided to run for president by announcing my presidential aspirations in a little town called Somerset, Pennsylvania. Now, why Somerset, Pennsylvania? It's 5 miles from Shanksville, Pennsylvania, where Flight 93 went down. And it's 15 miles from Tyre Hill, Pennsylvania, where Pietro Santorum came and brought his son Aldo. Pietro was a big, strong guy who fought in World War I for Austria. But that part of Austria became Italy after the war. He found a good job, worked on a mail train, lived in the most beautiful little town maybe I've ever been to, on the shores of Lake Garda at the foot of the Dolomite Mountains up near Austria. Beautiful place. But he left in 1927 and came to the coal mines of Somerset County. Why? Because there was a man there by the name of Benito Mussolini who said that you needed to believe in him and what he wanted for you and for society. And so he came for one word. He used to tell me this. He came for one word, freedom. And he worked in the deep mines of Somerset County, Pennsylvania until he was 72 years old, digging coal. I'll never forget, first time that I ever saw someone dead was my grandfather. I remember kneeling next to his casket, and eye level were his hands. And I saw his hands folded on his chest. They were enormous hands. I look at my spindly little fingers, and I see these huge, thick hands that all I could think of was there's a man who clawed his way for my freedom. And so when people say, well, why are you coming out? Nobody gives you much a chance to win this thing. Why are you going out and leaving your family, quitting your jobs, putting yourself out there to be beat up by the left, which they just love to do? Why are you doing this? Because we're not going to lose freedom on my watch. I'm going to do my part. I get this question a lot. Can we really win back America? Have we gone too far? Has our culture degraded to the point where our children don't even know who we are? As you know, the worst scores on aptitude for our high school seniors is not math and science, it's history. I had a teacher from Washburn University, a professor from Washburn University, talked to me in Council Bluffs, Iowa just a couple weeks ago, and he said, one of the things I do is I hand out the citizenship test. For people who want to be naturalized citizens, I hand out the citizenship test to incoming freshmen in my class. The average score is 40%, 10% pass rate. Ronald Reagan, in his farewell address, said the thing he was most concerned about as he left office was whether American young people were going to know who we are. Ladies and gentlemen, if we're going to win this election, and more importantly, if we're going to win freedom again, we need someone who can tell America who we are, remind us of how great we are, and how we can believe in ourselves again. To stop listening to the siren song of government and leaders who say, trust me. In 2008, Barack Obama went around the country and said, trust me. You can believe in me. I'll make the changes. I'll do the things to take care of things in Washington. After watching him concentrate power, him grab authority, his explode government, America needs a president who doesn't want people to believe in him, but they need a president that believes in you. I'm running for president. There are a lot of good people out there running. I'm running for president because of what Bill Armstrong said. I was conservative before it was cool. And I was out there not checking the boxes. Jim will tell you. When I was in the United States Senate, I didn't just check the boxes and vote the votes and then go home and work the district to get reelected. I went out and led. And I took not just the pledges. See lots of pledges being signed. I didn't take just the pledges. I took the bullets. I went out and fought on the issues that some people just don't even want to touch. I fought on Social Security. Yes, I tried to reform the Social Security system for 12 years in the United States Senate. I did do something that has never been done. I was the author of the Welfare Reform Bill in 1994 in the contract with America when I was in the House, and I managed the bill on the floor of the United States Senate as a freshman member. And we ended a federal entitlement. Paul Ryan's plan, everybody focuses on Medicare, but the biggest part of Paul Ryan's plan saving is in other means-tested entitlements, Medicaid, food stamps, housing programs, education programs, all of which, in one iteration or another, I have proposed similar to what he did, which is we have to get the federal government out of these areas. They have no business being there. Take that money, block grant it, and give it back to the states. Only one person in this race successfully did that, me, with welfare. Imagine, we got Bill Clinton to sign a bill that ended a federal entitlement for income support for the poor, their voters. Let's just be honest, their voters. Why do you think most of these programs are there? Their voters. We ended that program. I kept my focus, my eye on the ball. People say compromise is a bad thing today. It's not. If you stick to your principles and compromise on things you can compromise on. The three things I wanted to accomplish in welfare reform was to end the federal entitlement, require work, and put a time limit on welfare. We never budged on those three things. Now, we budged on daycare, we budged on transportation, we budged on a lot of things around the periphery. But we stuck to those principles, and eventually, because we went to the American public and convinced them the rightness of our action, the Democrats folded and almost half the Democratic caucus voted. Patrick Moynihan, Daniel Patrick Moynihan was barely in tears as that vote came down. We got 70 votes. We can do it again if we have leaders who can articulate a clear vision to the American public and say why we need to believe in ourselves. I talked about poverty not being the ultimate disability. We needed to believe in people's ability to provide for themselves. We need a vision. I provided it. On moral cultural issues, Jim will tell you, partial birth abortion, the Born Alive Infant Protection Act, the Unborn Victims of Violence Act. Time after time, I went to the floor, and we were able to win. I'll never forget, the second time we debated, a long debate, I was on the floor hours and hours and hours debating this. And eventually, one by one, people would come over, like, for example, Ben Campbell, who had voted against it. But I'll never forget getting a phone call from Ben from his hospital room. He had just had an accident. He was watching me on the floor, from the floor, and said he couldn't justify hearing next to him in the emergency room people scrambling to save lives and let people kill innocent human as they held them in their hand. He couldn't reconcile it, and so he changed. We touch people, you communicate. I'll never forget Patrick Leahy. Yes, Patrick Leahy. Coming up to me on the floor of the Senate and saying, this was the second or maybe even the third time we debated the bill, came up to me and said, I want 20 minutes of your time. Well, Bill knows what that is. I mean, you control the time in favor of the bill. I said, well, they got plenty of time over there. What do you want 20 minutes of my time? He said, give me 20 minutes of your time, and if you don't, I'm going to leave and I'm going to change my vote. I said, 20 minutes is yours, Pat. And he went up there and painfully conceded that the points I was making just were too persuasive. We won battles because we went to the American public. We went and we provided a vision. We led. On national security issues, there was nobody who was a greater defender of the state of Israel than me. On the Armed Services Committee, in providing the Iron Dome that now Israel has to defend themselves from weapons, to the Iran Freedom and Support Act, where I was out trying to shut down the Iranian nuclear program when the intelligence department said it didn't exist. And there was one person who stood in my way on the floor of the United States Senate. His name was Joe Biden. But we fought. We got a bill passed in Iran and on Syria to try to help protect the state of Israel, because unless the United States is a friend of the state of Israel, Israel will have no friends. So I'm running because we can get things done. But I'm also running because I think we can win. Has anybody else in this race who's running for president or even thinking about running for president ever defeated a Democratic incumbent? That's what we're going to have to do in this race. Well, you're looking at them.
I defeated a Democratic incumbent, was outspent 3-1, 60% Democratic district in the House. My opponent had never gotten less than 60% of the vote, and I won. 2 years later, I was redistricted into a 71% Democratic district against a 24-year Democratic incumbent, and I won. 2 years later, I went out. 2 years later, I ran for the United States Senate in Pennsylvania, 1 million more registered Democrats than Republicans, in a campaign against a man who had just beat the sitting Attorney General of the United States 2 years before, two-term governor of Pennsylvania, Dick Thornburgh. No one else wanted to run the race. I was alone in the Republican primary for the United States Senate. I was running against James Carville and Paul Begala, who had just run Bill Clinton's campaign. So I was up against the best. One of the proudest things I've accomplished in my political career. In James Carville's book, I was listed as number 3 of his 5 most hated Republicans. I'm shooting for number 1. And I won. In 2000, George Bush lost the state of Pennsylvania by 4 points. I won it by 5. I was the only conservative running for statewide office that year that won an election where George Bush lost in that state. Yes, I lost in 2006, but so did everybody else in Pennsylvania, by a lot. Ladies and gentlemen, we need someone who can go out and take on, head on, and yet at the same time, paint a positive vision for our country. We need someone from a region of the country where the votes are competitive. I won't ask you this question because I'm going to stop now and ask for your questions. When's the last time we nominated someone, the Republican Party nominated someone for president from east of the Mississippi, other than Gerald Ford, who was appointed president and would have never been nominated otherwise? Answer, Tom Dewey in 1948. Wouldn't it, Kansas. My hearing's still pretty good. We need someone from the area of the country that's going to decide this election, who can win votes and elections with the people who are the swing voters who will decide this election. That's why I'm running. That's why I'm heading back to Des Moines. And I need your help. The national media is not paying a whole lot of attention to me. I've thought about this and prayed about this long and hard as to why nobody seems to pay any attention to old little Rick Santorum out there working, just churning away. Well, I just got to think about it. And if I was the mainstream media, do I want to promote a candidate who's going to be the toughest person for Barack Obama to beat? Or will I do what I can to bury him? You think about that. I do. I'll be happy to take your questions. God bless you. Someone's going to help me here with where the... Someone have a microphone or bring up a microphone?
Get up and call it out, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
Senator, I have a question. Your loss, do you think... I'm wondering if Tim Gill might have had a great deal to do with that. He targeted people just like you that are conservative, that will take family values down to the mat.
There was a story done, I think it was the year of my election, in Atlantic Monthly. It was a profile on Tim Gill and what he accomplished here in Colorado Plain. And in the first paragraph of that article, he said, "Our plan is to make sure there is never another Rick Santorum elected to a national office." My opponent spoke at the Human Rights Campaign. My opponent was a pro-life Democrat, son of Bob Casey, one of the great social conservative leaders, maybe last social conservative leader of the Democratic Party. And he was wrapped himself in his father, but he embraced the gay and lesbian community like no other candidate had. He went out and spoke and did fundraisers, estimates millions, certainly millions in direct contribution. And I believe over 10 million in indirect contributions starting in my race 18 months. Why? Because I had the temerity to stand up
in 2003, before any of this started to roll, before Lawrence versus Texas was even decided, and I fired a shot across the bow of the United States Supreme Court and said, Supreme Court, you can decide this case the right way and say, the sodomy statute is violent of equal protection and everything will be fine. But if you say there's a constitutional right to consensual sexual activity, Katie, bar the door. And that's what they did. When I said that, I didn't compare anything. I said that if the Supreme Court gives the right of individuals the constitutional right to consensual sexual activity, then you have the right to incest, you have the right to all sorts, polygamy, you name it. You have the right to anything if it's consent. When I said that, the gay community went ballistic. And they came after me. The mainstream media called for me to resign because I was comparing homosexuality with incest and other things. No, I wasn't. I was saying that if the standard is consent, then how do you rationally draw the line? You can't. And they aren't. And subsequent to that, the Massachusetts decisions and others came down, and I stood for marriage. I was the one with Wayne Allard, and Marilyn Musgrave, two great warriors here in Colorado, who stood for, and we forced a vote on the federal marriage amendment. But ladies and gentlemen, we have this issue before us again today, and it's within our party. And we need to talk about it. There's some in our party who say, well, if New York wants to pass same-sex marriage, that's fine with me. Some who say, well, I'm not going to get involved in what states do. It's their business. Abraham Lincoln said it best. We do not have the right to do wrong. States do not have the right to destroy the American family. It is your business. It is not and should not. It is not fine with me that New York has destroyed marriage. It is not fine with me that New York is setting a template that will cause great division in this country. There is not 50 definitions of marriage, nor should there be. There is one definition of marriage. There are those in our party who say, well, the 10th Amendment says they can do anything they want. No, they cannot. They cannot do something that is immoral and wrong and injurious to our federal system and to our country. And the building block of our country, contrary to some, is not the individual. It is the family. The individual is building a society on individual is like building a society on grains of sand. You need a bond. You need a bond upon which to build. And that bond is marriage. And the marriage is the glue that holds the family together, that gives us the ability to raise a structure, a great structure. We are playing into the liberals. Those who say, let the states do whatever they want, are playing into the liberals' trap. What do you think they're going to do? They're going to do what they did on abortion. Get enough state legislatures to start doing this, and then they'll go to the Supreme Court and say, we can't have people married in Iowa and not married in Nebraska when they cross the state line. We can't have people married in New York and not married in Pennsylvania. That is unequal. We can't let that stand. And we will get a decision that none of us here like. Now, I know this is not a popular opinion in some circles, but it is the conservative opinion. It is the opinion that says that we are a country that is a moral enterprise, that there are values that hold us together and bind us together, that if they fracture, so will this country. And nothing is more central to that than the family.
Okay. Hello.
Jim?
That microphone. I want everybody to hear me.
They'll hear you anyway, Jim, if you belt it out.
Okay. Senator, I would like you to tell everybody who's here about one of the finest moments that has ever occurred in the U.S. Senate from my perspective. I was there, I was in the gallery with Chuck Colson, and it occurred after Bill Clinton had vetoed the partial birth abortion ban twice. And there was a tremendous battle to override that veto. And you got into a nose-to-nose confrontation with Senator Barbara Boxer. And what happened that day should be immortalized for the American people. Would you describe it?
It's very interesting, Jim. When I came to the United States Senate, I had never said the word abortion on the floor of the House for 4 years. I spent a year in the United States Senate, and I never said the word. Why? I was afraid. Bill knows. When you stand up and you fight for conservative principles, that's one thing. But when you stand up on the moral, cultural issues, well, let's just put it this way. After I started doing that, my children, after they read the paper, started to refer to me as ultra. Because that was the word in front of every time I was described as the ultra-conservative Rick Santorum. And so when I decided to step up and take on the issue of partial birth abortion, I did so with a lot of trepidation. But I can tell you, of all the things that I've done in my time in the United States Senate, at no time did I feel like I was ever more blessed than during those moments. Jim talks about one story. I could give you a dozen of things that were just amazing things that happened. The moment when Jim was there when the baby cried, as I was pleading for the recognition of humanity of this child in the womb. It was a moment when, in 1998, when we were finishing up the debate. I'll get to your story in a minute. There was a moment in 1998 where we were just about to vote the next day on the bill to override the president's veto for the second time to try. And I had debated 6 hours with Barbara Boxer that day. I think I should get a little time off in purgatory for that personally, but that's another story. But so I finished the debate, and I just have this sense that I needed to say more. Felt called. So I went back in the cloakroom and I called Karen. It was 8 o'clock at night. We had a little girl, Sarah Marie, who was about a year old, and I could hear her screaming in the background, and we had 3 other children under the age of 5, and you know how that can be. And I told Karen, I said, I just feel like I have to say more. And she said, do what you feel like you have to do, what you're called to do. So I went back out there on the floor of the Senate. I told Mike DeWine, who was sitting in the chair from Ohio, because he had to stay there as long as I talked. I said, I'll only be a few minutes. An hour and a half later. Don't worry, I'm almost done. An hour and a half later, I finished. And what I did is, partial birth abortion was used not to save the health or life of the mother, but it was used when mothers and fathers found out that the baby they were expecting was not what they were expecting. That the baby had some abnormality, some problem that they didn't want to deal with, and so they decided the best option was to kill their child late in pregnancy. And so I gave story after story of children whose mothers and fathers heroically fought to have their children born, going from hospital to hospital because hospitals and doctors wouldn't deliver these disabled children. They didn't want the liability. I finished speaking and wrapped up that day, and I thought, well, maybe a couple of senators would be watching late at night and who don't have a life and watch C-SPAN, and maybe that I would convince them. Came back the next morning, and we lost by 3 votes. Didn't change a vote. I walked out onto the platform outside the Senate and walked through the park and had a pity party for myself that I was a bad father because I'd gotten home and the kids were in sleep that night and I'd left before they were up, and my wife was the same way. And And I had indulged myself in thinking that somehow I could do something heroic and great. And then 5 days later, I got an email, and it was from a young man from Michigan State University. And the email said as follows. The other night, I was flipping through the channels with my girlfriend sitting on the couch, and I came across you standing next to a picture of a little boy with a disability. And so we stopped to listen. And as we listened for a while, I looked down and I saw tears running down my girlfriend's cheek. I looked at her and I said, "What was wrong?" I asked her what was wrong. And she looked up at me and she said, "I'm pregnant. And I was going to have an abortion, but I'm not going to have an abortion anymore." A few months later, in April of that next year, a little girl named Rebecca was born. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in a very difficult time. We are in a time that truly tries men's and women's souls. We are in a time when we have to be faithful. Sometimes it's hard to see whether we're going to be successful. Sometimes it's hard to see what God's plan in His hand is over this country that you know He loves. I know it's frustrating. But you're called to be faithful, to fight for justice, to fight for the cause that our founders established this country under God. Christopher Lash once said, "Every day we get up and we tell ourselves lies so we can live." The lie too many Americans tell themselves is they can get up, you can leave this room, you can go off and have a nice conference and go back to do what you were planning to do before you came here. And America will no longer be free and safe and prosperous. This is a time for heroic action. This is a time for sacrifice, not by putting on a uniform, but by engaging in the civil discourse and engaging in the political discourse like you have never done before, because our freedom and our country is at stake. I need your help. I need your help. Go to ricksantorum.com and help in any way you can. You need someone who's going to stand up and fight. And I'll close with Jim's story. I was on the floor of the Senate one day and talking about partial birth abortion, and Barbara Boxer was at the rostrum right next to me across the aisle. And I looked over at her and I asked her a question. I said, "When is a baby born?" She looked over at me, she goes, "Well, the baby's born when the baby's born." I said, "Well, that's not what I'm asking you. We're talking about a procedure where the baby is born all but the head. Now, I want to know, when is a baby born? If you're saying the baby isn't born with the head inside the mother, well, when is the baby born?" I said, she goes, "When the mother takes the baby home from the hospital." I said, "You can't possibly mean that." I should have not given her an out, but I did say that because I was so shocked that she would say it. I said, "Well, what if," and she said, "Well, the baby's born." We were back and forth. I said, "Well, what if the baby's, foot were in? Would the baby be born then? If everything but the foot were inside the mother, could you kill the baby?" "I'm not going to answer this question. It's a ridiculous question for you to ask," she said. I said, "Well, I need to know the answer. If the foot is inside the child, can you kill that child?" And we kept going back and forth and back and forth. She refused to answer the question. And what you don't hear if you listen to the audio version is that from the time I started this debate to the time it ended, she went from standing next to me to standing at the far desk right next to the door. And every time I would ask the question, she would stop at another desk, pull up the microphone. She wanted out because she couldn't answer the question. And I eventually said, I said to her, "So you're saying that if the foot is inside the baby, okay, that you can't kill the baby?" Eventually conceded, "No, you can't." So I said, "Well, what if the knee were inside the baby?" At that point, she said, "This was ridiculous. I'm not answering these questions," and she left the chamber. Ladies and gentlemen, they can't answer the question. They can't answer the question because the question is obviously answered. That's a life.
It's a child. Barack Obama was the only person I know in a legislative body anywhere in this country who stood up and opposed another one of my bills called the Born Alive Infant Protection Act. It was a bill that said that a child born as a result of a botched abortion must be given appropriate medical care. Simple as that. A child born completely separated from the mother must be given appropriate medical care. It passed unanimously in the Senate, it passed unanimously in the House, and was signed by the President. It subsequently, after we passed it, I authored the bill. States copied it and passed it all over the country. One state blocked it. A chairman by the name of Barack Obama in the Senate Judiciary Committee in Illinois. It eventually made its way to the floor of the state Senate in Illinois, and to my knowledge, he is the only person in a state legislature that actually got up and argued against this bill. And this is what he said. He said, I am against this bill because if we give rights to a child who's alive and born prior to 40 weeks, that will undermine Roe versus Wade, and the parent has the right to kill their child prior to 40 weeks gestational age. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a huge battle ahead of us on moral cultural issues, on economic issues, on freedom issues, on national security issues. I need your help. This country needs your help. Do not be the country. Do not be the people whose generation lost freedom. Fight. 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 God bless you.